TC and Jim, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. This weekend I had the pleasure to travel up north to Gravenhurst, just north of Barry in cottage country. And when I was there I witnessed a rather splendid thing that we call the autumn. And as I was looking at this magnificent display of colour through the forests, it struck me that nature itself has a force within it that is constantly changing and evolving. And as we live our daily lives and we navigate through this world, we often don't pay attention to the very changes that are taking place before us. And yet at the autumn time and at the springtime, when we start to see that change in action, where there are these noticeable changes within our environment, we begin to appreciate that forever evolving power that runs throughout nature itself. But what's more is that within nature there are certain forces and a will to survive. And as we observe our surroundings, whether that be in the springtime or in the autumn time, we begin to see nature itself striving to fulfill its own purpose of survival. That we see nature looking to create something within this world that can support its fellow creatures. And yet when nature has fulfilled its purpose in some way, rather than mourning that loss, that death of that simple organism of a leaf, for instance, nature creates this wonderful display, celebrating its purpose, celebrating its role within that bigger system that it plays. When I was standing there thinking of these things, noticing the trees and the colours around me, it brought back this famous quote by Nietzsche, who said that the autumn is more like a season of the soul than it is of nature. And those words began to make me think and contemplate my own place within the world, but also the very nature of my own self. What is it that Nietzsche meant when he said that autumn is a season of the soul more than a season of nature? As spiritualists, we understand that this power that we call the soul, which makes up our personality, our intelligence, and these divine qualities which have manifested within ourselves in a very individual way, that power is a living power just like the forces and powers within nature. That is that within our own lives, every single time we think, every single time we act or talk or express in some way, the very nature of ourself changes. And within our own being, there are forces and wills that are causing us to strive for more. Not perhaps just to strive for survival, but to strive for these more higher divine purposes within our life. Plato once said that the nature of being a human is a nature of being constantly unfulfilled. That is, that within our own self there are certain desires, appetites, wills, whatever word we want to use to describe them, that at the moment that they are satisfied, are replaced simultaneously by a new desire. This morning, perhaps, you've all had the desire to tune in online and watch the service. That desire within us, that will within us, is the very thing that moved us into action. And now that you're here and you fulfilled that desire, it will be simultaneously replaced by a new one. Perhaps the desire to go and drink something. Perhaps the desire to go and sleep. Perhaps the desire for me to stop talking because I'm boring you. I'm not sure what it will be replaced with. But nevertheless, it certainly will be. And that is the very nature of being human, that we're never satisfied. And often we think that that's something to do with a negative aspect of being a human being, that we're never quite satisfied with what we have around us. And yet when we look at nature, nature too is never satisfied. That tree in its journey of life itself is forever striving to move towards the light. And once it does, it doesn't just stop and be nothing or just stay stationary. It strives further to develop and grow. And it's those very desires within us, these desires that Plato recognized, that are our will to unfold, our will to experience, our will never to be satisfied, but to wring out every drop of experience that life has to offer us. And of course, within our own life, there are these competing forces that perhaps hinder us from that journey that we're on ourselves. Perhaps they aid us in that journey that we're also on. Because many of the things that we experience within our life, we have no control over. We can't control the actions of other people. We can't control the situations that we often find ourselves in. And those situations, those things that we experience as we navigate life, change us from within. And the very qualities that we have within ourselves, to some degree, determine the way that we act and interact within those experiences that we find ourselves within. The difficulty is, of course, is that as we begin to change and grow, we'll often become fearful of what the future holds. The fall is a season of change, but a season that celebrates that change through the very beauty of nature itself. And yet, often when I look at friends and family and those people that I touch upon within my own life, I've come to recognize that the greatest fear that a human being has isn't actually the fear of death, but it's the fear of life itself. That often within our own self, as we begin to change and unfold, which is the very most perfectly natural thing that we can do, we can't stop that change and unfoldment of our own spiritual power. Rather than celebrating that, we often try to push that change away. I'm sure each and every one of us here this morning has experienced a moment in life when everything just seems to be right. We're contented, we're satisfied, our relationships are going well, our work is going well. We have the time to explore those interests and things that we enjoy and that satisfy us. And in those brief moments of contentment, which may last a day, a week, a month, or even years, rather than embracing change, quite often we want to hold on to the very things that we've created. The difficulty is, of course, is that nothing in nature remains static. The difference perhaps with the human being, and as to why many religious philosophies have said that we are born in the image of God, is that we have agency over our own lives. Those leaves on that tree, as they're born in the spring and the summer conquers the spring and they enjoy their life. They are in abeyance to the very laws of nature that create that change and the fall. The fall then being conquered by winter itself, only to find rebirth later on. Nature, many of the creatures within nature do not have agency. They're not able to make their own choices. They're not able to adapt in certain ways to their environment where they're able to continue to live from their very own choosing. The human being can. But when we choose to act, I believe, not in harmony with that natural change within nature itself, but we try to stagnate, we try to hold on, we will often find that life itself has a very funny way of causing us to change ourselves. I have the pleasure and the honour each year to give sittings, private sittings, to many different people. And within those sittings, I'm there to give those people an insight into the very nature of themselves, those situations that they're going through, those wills, those forces within their life that are perhaps hindering them from achieving their full potential or are aiding them in doing that. It's also my job to be able to see the potential within that power of how that soul could grow and move and express as it begins to move forward on that journey of life. The thing that's always struck me about these sittings is that everyone's story is very different. We all live an individual and unique life. And yet when people go through the hardest times within their life, it's not because they're not worthy, or it's not because they don't deserve something better. It's very often because they're scared to live. They're scared to actually make the changes that are needed to enable that soul to unfold and move forward. As I've said to you earlier, Plato said that once a desire is fulfilled, it's replaced simultaneously by a new desire. Once you express yourself in the way in which your soul needs to be expressed at that time, we haven't arrived where we can sit, be complacent and say, well, this is my life now. This is all that I need to be doing. Because as soon as the soul experiences and expresses what it needs in that moment, that expression itself changes the very nature of the power within us. And that soul then needs to find a new expression, a new avenue to experience. And when we stop that natural unfoldment, that natural change, that is then when life forces us to do so. When we hold on to that job that pays well but doesn't satisfy us anymore, what happens? We begin to change, we begin to resist that perhaps subconsciously, unconsciously. The very powers within life itself are prompting us to move in a different way, to express in a different way, and we end up losing that job. The same within relationships, within the places that we live, within the very interests and hobbies that at one time satisfy us no longer do. We have to move with the times and with the change that is inevitable within ourselves. The spiritualist understands that in order to understand what those changes need to be, that we don't need to look to a God for the answers. We don't need to look to a medium for the answers. We don't need to look to our friends and our loved ones for the answers. What we have to begin to do is reconnect to that power that is within all things. That very power that I talked about at the beginning of this address that allows those changes within life to occur. And when we begin to experience that power for what it is, and we begin to allow that reality of that power to manifest within us, within our conscious minds, we begin to understand who we are. Perhaps we have to begin by looking back through our lives and understanding the experience that we've had thus far. We have to take stock of the things that have hindered us, the things that perhaps still affect us, the things that allow us to flourish. And we have to harness that power. We have to become confident in that knowing that that change is natural, that that change isn't something that's going to take away from our life. It's going to be something that's going to add to that expression of who we truly are, so that one day perhaps we can fulfill that true potential of that power. And yet, when we go through those changes, of course, they're never easy. Again, when we look through nature, we find that nature is striving each and every day to survive, to fulfill its purpose within the world. And I very much believe that within our own lives, every day is a day of strife. It's a day where we have to struggle in order to fulfill that potential of who we are. And often when we look at struggle, as I've said, we see it in a negative way. But it's not negative, I don't believe, but rather a motivating force that forces us to move with that natural unfoldment. Just in the way that within the winter time, all things die. The leaves fall off the trees in the autumn. The trees stand there naked in the winter, waiting for rebirth. In those moments within our own life when we seem to lose everything, in those moments where we're at our lowest ebb, perhaps where we can't see what is to come for the future, perhaps we lose hope that there is a future. Perhaps that's caused by losing someone to the spirit world. Perhaps that's through the grief of losing a job, through losing a relationship, through feeling lost and having no direction. The darkest nights of our own soul feel like the winter within nature. And yet we only have to look to see that in the spring comes rebirth and renewal. And in the same way, within our own life, as we go through those hardest times, they often allow the best of life to come forward. New opportunities, rebirth. When we believe that we'd only die once, I think we've missed the point of life itself. But that we are constantly going through a cycle that is mirrored within nature. We are constantly being reborn, living, dying, and being reborn again as something new and slightly different to what we was before. Perhaps this morning there are some of you that are going through the winter of your own soul. That we're at that point in life where we just don't know the way forward. We're at that point in life where we've lost all hope for the future. And yet when we look within ourselves, and usually it's at this period of time when we're at our lowest ebb, and we've looked at all other avenues to move forward, that we finally start to look within the self. When we do, we find that there resides within us this power that will strive and struggle to be renewed. That power that we call the Spirit that is always present within our lives, forever encouraging us, forever motivating us to begin anew. Often, ladies and gentlemen, we do lose the way. Often we don't remember what life should be all about because we get lost in the daily rat race of life. And yet each week, across spiritualist churches and centres across the world, that power manifests. Our loved ones come back to say, I love you, I'm here. That we're never alone. But of course, those people also come back with a greater message. That the physical death of the body is merely an illusion. That at that moment that the physical body dies, that the brain ceases to exist, the heart stops working. That power that we've been talking about throughout this address lives on. And that if the ultimate finality of our life, that we believe often is the ultimate finality of our life, physical death is but an illusion, all of these bumps in the road, all of these moments where we feel lost, we feel hopeless, are also an illusion. Because with each time that we die, we are reborn again. However difficult things become, ladies and gentlemen, however hard perhaps COVID has hit your family or hit your own life, however much perhaps we can't see what's going to come for the future, perhaps we've lost our job, perhaps the stresses of our daily life at this particular time has started to take a toll on our relationships with our families and our friends. Remember that change is inevitable. But if we work with that change, something better will come in the future. We just have to simply look within, and rather than enduring life, begin enjoying it by allowing that power of ourselves to manifest freely, not fettering it down in chains, not trying to be something that we're not trying to hold on to the very things that we've created, but just let go and allow ourselves to begin to renew ourselves. And I very much believe, ladies and gentlemen, that when we do that, we can be the autumn ourselves. That through that strife, through the ending of a particular part of our life and the beginning of a next chapter, rather than having to be sad, a melancholy affair, we can celebrate in that colour of that change within our own power. We can celebrate that we are part of that change and that we are being renewed with new hope, renewed with new experience, renewed with new expression, that eventually will lead us to fulfill that true potential of who we are. That, ladies and gentlemen, I believe is the true meaning of life itself. And it's what I believe is why the autumn is the season of the soul more than the season of nature. Thank you.